Again, and hello again, and welcome to another episode from the Bleed with Eric, David, and myself. Again, Andy is running a little bit late, but he will join us when he can. This is the last test week that we have, so it's just going to be the three, maybe four, of us for now. Next week is when we're going to start our sessions with certain creators, and at first we're going to be joined by Ryan Burton of Dark Engine, and we're going to discuss Seconds, the new graphic novel by Brian Lee O'Malley. But before we do that, we got to get through this week. Oh boy. And this week is a sexually frustrating and titillating and very much a fun comic and something that I'm sure everyone wishes they could do. We're going to be talking about sex criminals and not the people that live next door. We're going to be talking about...
You live next door to.
We're talking about the comic that swept the Eisners by Chip Zdarsky and Matt Fraction. And but before we get to that, this is the part where we talk about our picks in the news. So I'm going to pass it over to Eric. And Eric, what news got you excited this week?
Well, on the news front, I think I don't want to be the guy that's always bringing up movie stuff, but the rumblings of an Inhumans movie, I think, gives a.
God damn it! You stole mine. That's what I was gonna say.
Sorry, we need to coordinate, guys. Yeah, but just the Inhumans movie, I think that really more from the point of view of what that means about the importance of the characters to the Marvel line. We've seen what they did to Guardians of the Galaxy with all of the different books and support that they put out leading up to that movie. So if there actually is an Inhumans movie, they're clearly going to be working on a bigger franchise than we've seen. So that seems noteworthy to me.
Yeah, for me, I was going to say the Inhumans thing. I'm very interested to see how that goes. Other than that, I guess it's not particularly news, but what I'm really excited about is the fact that Grant Morrison's Multiversity series comes out next week. I've been waiting for this for so long, and I just have a lot of people, and it's just really exciting. I didn't realize that it was actually coming out so soon. I thought that we still had like a month or so to go. But I saw the shipments that come into my shop next week, and Multiversity #1 was on it, and I'm just incredibly excited to finally get my hands on that piece of work.
Yeah, I'm excited about that comic too.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing, well, it's not really it's exciting, but I just think it's notable that the Harvey Award voting ends on the 18th, and there are new comics that I am particularly interested in. I just did an interview with James Asmus of Quantum and Woody, and he'll be joining us on the show in a couple weeks, but he is nominated for quite a few things with that comic, which is a hilarious comic. If you haven't checked it out, it's one of the few comics that actually makes me crack up and kind of have to look away for a second and then look back at the panel and read the bubble and laugh again. So it was a very interesting comic. I really thought it was funny, and that's just kind of what reminded me of the Harveys being nominated. Now, I'm telling you to vote for him or that comic, but if you are, working in the industry, make sure you go and vote for your favorite comics, because these are the ones that they vote for themselves. If you're making comics, it's your favorite comic that's going to win. So go vote if you still can, and then I guess we'll just quickly go through our picks. Eric, what did you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, the only new comics I read today, I read Original Sin #7. I enjoy the series. I think it's an interesting shift in an event comic to have something that tends to be so character-focused. There's been a lot less giant splash pages and events. It's ironic because it sort of seems like it's a comic that's giving people what they say that they want from big crossovers, sort of very grounded in the character identity, but at the same time significantly changing things. And for some reason, I get the impression that it's it's not exciting people as much as a crossover that's primarily focused on giant punches. I like it, and I think that Mike Deodato is doing remarkable work. This issue in particular, I thought that the panel layout that he chose for many of those pages was really striking. I think that I've been familiar with Deodato's work since the '90s, right, when he was working on the old Avengers, and in his evolution as an artist from what was almost a little cheesecake back in the '90s to a real gritty, real competent storyteller has been something really nice to see. You don't see a lot of careful and slow and steady evolution in comics creators. You also don't usually see that many artists that have been working steadily for so long getting the big event book. So that's what I read this week, earlier today.
David, what did you read?
Cool. Actually, I just caught up on The Auteur from Oni Press by Rick Spears, James Callahan, and Luigi Anderson, I think, is the colorist. It is just such a bizarre and well-done series. It made me want to just go out and find everything that Rick Spears could do. It's basically, I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's basically the story about this producer in Hollywood on this quest to make sort of his masterpiece out of a slasher film that he's trying to do. And he hires rescue recruiter in there. That's so well done. It was a nice, cool sort of new feeling for a book. And I'm really looking forward to finding what else Spears has done and seeing what he does going into the future. That's what I've been excited about.
Cool. That sounds interesting. I just read the Avengers 100th anniversary issue. I haven't really read any of the 100th anniversary issues, but this one's by James Stokoe, and I haven't gotten my hands on any of his stuff. I told my old retailer right before they closed down to please order me the Godzilla comic that he did, and it never came before they closed, and so I was never been able to get a hand on Orkstain and then I didn't kickstart Sullivan's Sluggers, so it was really cool to see his work on the Avengers, which was Better Ray Bill and Rogue and Black Mohawk Doctor Strange, and it was a black guy with a mohawk, a black guy with a mohawk version of Doctor Strange, and it was just so surreal. It was like jumped right into the middle of their adventure. They were just lost to the United States to the negative zone, and the Mole Men were attacking, and it was just those three Avengers, and just seeing that dynamic between this new Doctor Strange and Rogue and Better Ray Bill, and it was just cool to see them kicking ass. And James Stokoe's artwork is very awesome, very detailed, and very he's really good at filling with like making a landscape almost looking alien and surreal. It just has this really awesome look to it, and it was a fun adventure, and I would pay to read that comic monthly. If that comic was coming out, I would love to see it was freaking awesome. But
yeah, it made me wish that Stokoe was going to be the artist on that.
Just give him a book, like a what if book, and every issue let him tackle something different, and I would buy it. But I'd probably be like one of 25 people.
Yeah, dude, that would be all over that.
Mm-hmm. But I guess we should get to the topic at hand. Eric, why don't you tell us why you picked this book? I mean, we're not going to judge you. So I'm just kidding.
So I had read the first three issues when they were coming out. But then I said, you know what? For whatever reason, I'm going to wait for the trade to read the rest. So the trade finally came out, and I finally got it. I got an echo here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's my computer that keeps bouncing back. That's why the feed keeps cutting to me. Sorry. I'm turning my volume down. Go now and hopefully.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I finally caught up with it with the trade. When I got the first few issues, it was one of the few books that my wife would sort of read over my shoulder and laugh at and ask me to read more of. So I think that kind of inspired part of the choice. Also, just because I think that it is a book that a lot of people have been talking about. So it seems like a comic that's very of the moment. It's won a slew of awards. It's been given a great deal of recognition. So that's why I selected it. And it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite openings to a comic in recent history. It's got a very believable and instantly likable pair of leads in John and Susie, and it just basically it starts off. They feel like people I could know. They feel like people I have known. So I think for me, reading this, it sort of felt like I frequently read comics that are written for me when I was a teenager, and this is a comic that seems like it's written for me, as a 30-something living in Portland that's married and has had a long-term relationship, and gets all of the funny little references. I mean, this is a comic book that has little jokes about the personalities on NPR. It has little jokes to probably my favorite Coen Brothers movie, Bart and Fink, which I don't think is the most well-known Coen Brothers movie. So between all of the references and just it really appeals to me by not talking down to me. It appeals to me by not trying too hard to appeal to me. I get the distinct impression that this is a comic. And here we go. I should probably back up, and here's the cover, everybody. Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It feels like these two guys are just having a blast. They're doing the comic they want to do. They're having a great time with it, and that comes across. I think that Matt Fraction is a writer that I've always enjoyed his work. I've always thought that he was very talented, but this book feels like he just took away all boundaries and just sort of went for it. And he's done that before with some of his other projects, but this one in particular feels especially intimate and raw. So that's why I picked the book. I love it. I have more to say about it, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
No, it was a really good pick.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I think I think that the book's greatest strength is like Fraction's work with the characters, and that they both are immediately likable. Really, all the characters in it are great, and they feel like real people, just like you said. And I'm just really impressed with Fraction's work on this and the balancing between like humor, like sex jokes, and just its sort of brutal honesty, and the way it approaches the culture of learning about sex as a kid, and all of the tensions and confusion and fear and shame that can come with it. And I think that's just like it's a really impressive feat for him to have done. And I'm glad you picked it. Honestly, I love this book just as much as you do, and it appeals to so many different people. It's an easy one to put in the hands of someone who has never read comics before and get them to fall in love with it. And it's a beautiful piece of work. It really is.
I want to say real quick, I don't know where Matt Fraction either lived or heard about the story of people finding boxes of pornography in the woods, but let me tell you, that's something that I've known people as a teenager that did find. And I remember randomly coming across various illicit things in random places. And there's stories that I've heard from my friends, from Oregon, from Southern Oregon, from the Oregon coast, from Portland, stories that so completely connect with the coming of age sort of awkward discovery of like, in the same time period too, like 14.4 modems. You stumble across a crate of Playboy magazines. It so completely took me back to being 13 years old, and literally, I mean, we rented a room to a guy in our house. I cleaned it out when he moved out. He left behind all sorts of messed up stuff, and that was the one thing I remember coming across and thinking like, I don't think I should have found this, but I don't know what I'm going to throw it away, so maybe this will come with me.
Yeah,
I just think it's hilarious that seems like such a strangely universal experience. Maybe it's a West Coast thing.
Well, it seems like from the letters columns in the back, which I think is one of the greatest letter columns that's going on in single issue comics by a mile. And that's why I wholeheartedly recommend to anyone to buy the single issues, just to hear all these weird stories. the porn in the woods stories that people have. It's so funny. But I never had an experience like that. I never found porn in the woods. I grew up on the East Coast. I don't know if finding porn in the woods is.
It's the climate, man. It's too cold. It's too cold for your woods porn.
Yeah. But it was
like
great.
A California Oregon thing. It's moderate here.
Yeah, well,
great. It's really well done.
The book was great. Yeah, it's so honest and it's so full of like this heart that you don't find in a lot of comic books. I mean, you do find him in the independent stuff, but this is, I feel like, one of the most accessible yet totally it's not afraid to broach these topics, and it kind of gets that out of the way in the beginning in that very adolescent, juvenile way, just like a kid would, with all the sex acts being drawn on the bathroom wall with a Sharpie, and she's just going through and explaining them all. It's all butt stuff. It's all butt stuff. It's so funny. Like at what she says later, it's all butt stuff. You wanna try butt stuff? The book just has
the Dutch microwave was my favorite.
So there are some weird ones. Like there's one where he's putting his thing through her hair, like, and they're both smiling, and he's behind her and putting his thing through her hair. He's holding her hair up, and she's like, "That one seems pretty cool." Yeah, that one seems cool. How is that one the one that seems cool out of all of them? But there are some cool things. There are a lot of artistic touches that I really, really, really enjoyed. There was the callback to Halloween, those two times in the first two issues, and their kind of origin stories, And they walk by each other, and you don't really notice it at first until you read it the second time. But the three kids wearing the Kiss costume are walking by her, and you see the backs of their heads when she's like walking around. And then there's just a few other artistic touches that I really enjoyed. The layout where he escapes from the porno store and how it kind of shows his whole direction and how he gets into all those fights and throws dildos and sex toys at the guys, and it was really, really interesting. And I think
sorry, I lost you guys for a second there.
Welcome back. But one of I think one of the more interesting points that I thought I found about it was it's so relatable. It's despite the whole bank robbing thing and the whole stopping time thing, you can take the time aspect out, and it's just a very literal feeling of empty sex, and even with partners that you don't find yourself with until you find the one. I mean, it was just really interesting that they described that first feeling of meeting someone that maybe it's like, holy shit, maybe this is going to work out. And they did a really good job of doing that, and then adding on the doubts later of this is a real person. It's not just some idealized version in my head that doesn't have flaws. They do have flaws, It was such an honest approach to it in this fantastical circumstances that it was just it was great. I mean, I'm glad. I'm mad I didn't start reading this when it first came out. This is the first time I read it, and I'm kind of mad that I wasn't picking up the single issues. But
Oh yeah.
And I went and I got the singles. Even though I got the trade and waited for it, I also got the singles, and I do have to agree. This is a comic that's worth reading in the singles, if for that letter column in and of itself, because it is. It's the funniest, best, most interesting letter column I've ever read in comics. I lied. I said the only comic I read today was Original Sin 7. I also got and read Sex Criminal 7. And so, the first trade goes through the first 5 issues, and it just keeps going. If anything, the issues that follow this initial trade, they tend to get a little bit more. They delve a little deeper, and so you get the impression that the opening of the comic kind of makes a point about there are jokes coming, and there are a lot of jokes, but it's using those jokes to sort of get to deeper stuff about relationships. This book and Saga are, for me, as a married guy, seem to demonstrate the best depiction of adult relationships that you see. And you don't see a lot of good adult relationships because they tend to look for conflict. They want people to be fighting about dumb stuff all the time, or there's a lot of focus paid to the getting to know them part. But Saga and Sex Criminals, to a lesser extent, after the first meeting, it does a really good job of sort of living with the relationship that's happy and healthy but still not perfect. And that just even beyond comics, even in TV or movies, it's so uncommon to see it just like, okay, these are just people. They're together. They're gonna be together. They're gonna have ups and downs. We're not gonna play a will they or won't they, and we're not gonna threaten to break them up necessarily. But there's still gonna be other things. Their life is not over because they're in a relatively stable relationship, and that's, I think, one of the reasons that this has such a broad appeal to me, and also to my wife, and also to other people. I mean, it has a very we keep talking about the relatability and the humanity of the characters, but I think the big part for me is that there's for a comic book called Sex Criminals that takes so much joy in introducing such ridiculous sex acts and sex toys, it is one of the least exploitative comic books or stories that I've ever read. I mean, yeah, that stuff is in the background all the time, and it's hilarious. I mean, the sequence where John and Susie are running around the porn store, and they're doing sleeping bag races, and they've got like different masks and hats and all sorts of stuff. It's funny, and it's cheeky, but it's not exploitative. There's nobody being sort of exploited in the act of it. In fact, I actually went back and I was kind of glancing at it. You don't really see any of the characters put in a position of being objectified in the same way that you even see in like a traditional, like, all ages superhero comic. There's no male gaze bikini shots. Even when there is nudity and there is sex, it's done in a very positive and not derogatory way. And I think that also lends to the accessibility of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it speaks volumes of both fractions, Zdarsky's skill that they managed to pull something like this off. I think that does have a lot to do with its appeal. It isn't exploitive, and it does a really good job tapping into both like the feelings that they have between each other. Essentially at its heart, this is like a romantic comedy. It's a rom-com, and it's just built upon these two people who are very real, and their relationship between each other is very, seemingly, at least at first at this stage in the series, very loving. It's something that's relatable. And it also, what I think was interesting is like the conversation that, like throughout the series, where they talk about the relationships with other people, the other people that they've slept with over time and stuff. It gets to like the different dynamics a little bit, or at least hints at them of what like a sexual relationship can be like, what it means at different times with different people. And that again, like, just goes for the broad appeal of it, and it's a masterpiece, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It was. When we're talking about it again, but I want to delve a little bit deeper. Eric, what did you think about the what did you think about the art styling, and especially when it would signify that time would stop and everything kind of becoming that pinkish hue.
Well, I mean, the
Color
colors in the
world.
book are amazing. I mean, the colors help. I mean, this is a comic that would not work without the palette that Zdarsky has chosen, without all the cues and the little color effects that he's employed. I mean, it shows passage of time. It generates emotion. It creates sort of a warmth. I think that's part of why it seems so relatable, is because the colors, he's chosen very grounded, but sort of also bright and optimistic colors here. And the graphic design in general, as taken from like the covers of the single issues. I mean, those are some of the, like, graphically they're incredibly striking. They reach out to you from across the room. I mean, even the cover of the cover of the trade paper is the same way. All of the graphic design, the art style, the color, it's intentionally designed to sort of catch your eye, but at the same time, it's not. I don't know. It doesn't feel overdone. It feels very. There's a sense of restraint in the colors also that I think is sort of very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're both sort of vibrant yet understated at the same time. I like the trick that they use. I guess Chip does his own coloring on here.
Yeah.
I guess Christopher Sabella and Becca Kinsey do the flatting for it, but I like that everything in the background sort of fuzzed out just a little bit, kind of like it is on the cover for the book. That was a nice touch. You have these weird little like color wisps sort of seemingly zooming around the page, which is something I don't think I've ever seen in a book before. It's really well done. And I like how they show when time starts to slow down, when they have an orgasm in some of the scenes. For example, when they're in the porn shop in Cumworld and they watch the little porn with Monica Saint Cocaine or whatever the porn star's name was.
Jasmine Saint Cocaine.
Yeah, Jasmine Saint Cocaine. That it slowly stops and sort of glitches out. It's really well done, and the colors add a lot to that, I think. And to me, that's one of my favorite aspects of this visually, at least. And Zdarsky's general style of art is very interesting. It's I'd call it more of like cartooning than illustration. I know that's like a weird sort of distinction to make, but it feels more like a classical cartoonist than it does someone, say, like, Jerome Pena, or like some incredibly intricate, detailed, like design-oriented somebody. Another person would be like, why don't you, and I think that itself, Zdarsky's style, just adds so much to the sort of the humanism of the book. His facial expressions are just spot on. The way that he draws characters' eyes, in particular, I thought is really masterful. And you really just get so much character work from just his use of facial expressions, and it just blows my mind. Reading this for the second time, it's so well done that when I read it the first time, I just kind of zipped through it, and I was like, oh, this is really clever, this is really nice, this is well done. But then when you read it again for the second time, it's not necessarily as intricate as something like New Avengers that we were talking about last week, where it's, the plot itself is just really intricate, but I think just more of his actual character work and the placement of people and is absolutely genius. And it's so well done and it's so subtle. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, the artwork is definitely probably one of the best aspects of the book. It really has this very distinct look to it. It's it's almost I mean it's almost in that same kind of pop art style as the um, Chris Samney or even Mike Allred, but it has I feel like the characters. I mean, aside from the faces looking unique, and I mean, I love those guys' art, but Zdarsky just has this way of making each character be their own, and it's not like there's like a stock that he pulls from. Uh, I I really enjoy his young characters. His kids look like kids. His teenagers look like teenagers, and his bumbling idiots look like bumbling idiots. It's just it's so spot on. His use of perspective and setting the scene and his framing is so subdued for the book. It lets the characters kind of shine, and and I feel like that's what it's meant to do. But he still finds these ways to put those unique touches in there, and it's a really really beautiful book.
It seems like it's elegantly compatible and supporting to the writing. We talked last week about how you can reread a lot of the work by in the New Avengers, and you can see like little bits and pieces maybe in the writing or the plot or the dialogue that you didn't see. I feel like with every reread or every kind of flipping through of these issues in this trade for sex criminals, you see a little bit more about what's going on with the artistic craft. You see a little bit more like, oh, that seems so easy. Like it seems so obviously easy. He pulls it off. The best trick that he manages to pull here is that it doesn't look like it was that hard. It looks like he just sort of naturally managed to just sort of like, okay, this is what it was meant to be the whole time. I've got everything figured out. I'm gonna create these wonderfully unique characters, tell these really vivid stories. Everything is just so perfect and so spot on that to realize when you go back and you look at it and you go like, no, this is a lot of work. It takes more work to look like you didn't have to put any work into it at all than it does to make your stuff look like you put a lot of work into it. And that's the highest praise I think for an illustrator, is to know that, wow, I can see the lines he did not include and how important those lines and those flourishes were to not include them. I can see all of the moments of restraint as well as the moments of indulgence, and the jokes. He knows when to pull it back. He knows when to ratchet it up. It's really masterful stuff.
Yeah,
These guys deserve all of the praise they've been getting for it. I hate to be part of that echo chamber, but this is really, it just is one of the best comic books that's come out in recent years.
Yeah, it's an interesting pick, because with last week with Hickman's New Avengers, it was something that we sort of disagreed on, and this one, we're all in love with it just as much as everybody else is in love with it, and it is kind of like an echo chamber. But I think there's a lot that needs to be said about it too, and I think absolutely you're right. What the greatest thing that they've done here is make it look so easy and so fluid. And this is an incredibly difficult story to pull off well, without being exploitive, like you said, without losing that human element, with like balancing the comedy while establishing sort of like a personal gravity and seriousness, and like sort of that sense of alienation that both of them felt at younger ages, that really sort of makes you fall in love with the character and be able to relate to the character. To put all of these pieces together in a way that doesn't lean too far in one direction or the other is insanely difficult, I think. And they just make it look so goddamn easy. And you can read through this thing in a minute and be like, not even understand how much work probably went into it on their end. And it's just goddamn impressive. It really is.
These fucking guys.
These fucking guys.
I love that callback, and you almost immediately you could tell that it was going to be this term of endearment. Like, the first time she used it, I was like, she's gonna say this about him in so many different ways.
Yep.
Not all of them are gonna be positive, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to
This
see it come
fucking
up.
guy.
And it's such a funny device because their relationship felt so real. You know, it did feel so. Their jokes, the way they ribbed each other, it was very genuine, and
Mhm.
you don't find that in a lot of comics.
Yep. I think it led me to wonder a little bit. Like I kind of feel like Fraction writing this, like it's clear that he was someone who like had this kind of falling in love experience himself. And it's like I think I was able to do it, and it's probably him and Kelly Sue, his wife, and also a phenomenal writer. And it's sweet. I really enjoyed it, and I think one of the things that sort of stood out to me, and this is something that Fraction does a lot in his work, but I think it stands out particularly well in this book, are the way that he writes little sort of verbal tics into his characters' dialogue when they do things like stutter or say things like so or all of these sorts of things, and he like integrates that into their dialogue. And I think doing something like that sort of brings the characters sort of into that realm of realness and relatability, because all the people that I know speak using ums and so's and all that kind of stuff. Very stutters when they say like and, or you. And other people I think try to do similar things. Bendis, for example, is someone who comes to mind, but it doesn't feel as successful as it is in this. And even Fraction, in some of his other works, it doesn't necessarily feel as successful as it is in Sex Criminals, his use of those verbal tics. It was just something that stood out to me, and I just wanted to note that too.
I mean, I think it works so successfully really because of the restraint element. He doesn't use it in every line of dialogue. He uses it just enough so that you notice it, but he pulls himself back. If you listen to a real person, they're rarely going to talk in complete sentences. They're rarely going to I just said I'm talking and I just said if you were to dictate what somebody actually said, it would look far more like a stuttering idiot in text. So he knows how to do it just enough so that it works and it seems real, but it doesn't go too far. I think that's that sense of balance that is working really successfully here.
Yeah, it almost feels like, in a way, for Fraction at least, that this is I don't want to use the word magnum opus because it's not, but like I see in a lot. He's one of my favorite writers, and I read everything that he does. And some things sort of don't quite work. You can see where like he was sort of struggling to find exactly what the space was, or like to make it work with the artist or what have you. Like one of the things that comes in mind was the Defenders or Fear Itself, or like sort of the high concept of it really intrigued me, but like the execution fell a little bit short. And it seemed like he was just sort of kind of like trying to find exactly like how to execute something like that. And it feels like with Sex Criminals, he sort of hit that stride that makes him one of the greatest authors out there, where like his execution fulfills sort of like the vision in his head or in their head, him and Chip. And it feels like Sex Criminals sort of marks like the beginning of like the next phase of like Fraction's career, I guess, because he's still a relatively new name, all things considered. I mean, he did like Iron Man for a while and like those Marvel books, but in the grand scheme of things, he's new. And it just sort of felt like this marks like the beginning of sort of the next phase in his like creative career, and it really intrigues me. If you look back at his sort of back catalog of works, like a lot of his stuff is like very, I guess like cosmic and science fiction-y, big, widescreen, bright-eyed, ridiculous science fiction stuff like Casanova, and even his run on things like Thor and Iron Man. This seems way more refined, and so does his other work that's coming out from Image right now, Satellite Sam. Those feel very sharp, like it's a knife that he's been slowly sharpening over all of these years, and like finally it's at that sharpness that he's been like working towards for this whole time. So that's what I
Yeah.
see in this.
Yeah, Fraction's work. I like more of his books than I don't. But I'm always kind of iffy on him. I mean, I have Casanova on my shelf. I'm one of the few people, I guess, that I've discovered. I thought everyone liked it, that liked his X-Men run. I never really read his Iron Man stuff, and some of his Marvel stuff. I was sort of not too into the Defender stuff. I wasn't really into. But I think that Marvel took that awesome chance early on with when they decided to do a bunch of solo books out of kind of around the Avengers versus X-Men time, and they did Hawkeye and Captain Marvel and Gambit, and I thought all three of those books were really cool because they were all really unique. Hawkeye and Captain Marvel were kind of two sides of the same coin, both kind of about what they do on their off days and about their personal lives. Is Hawkeye more than other, but both living in a city and Carol going into space, but Hawkeye, they kind of all created this niche new comic where it just has opened the door for the kinds of stories that you wouldn't normally see in comics, and who knows how long it's going to last. But I kind of love it that we're getting a procedural She-Hulk comic, like Law and Order almost, and we're getting. I mean, Daredevil kind of had that element going for it for a while too, but we're getting these really interesting solo books, kind of because of Matt Fraction and his wife's work and what they did, and that Gambit book too. I mean, that didn't sell well, but it was still a unique book, about Gambit heists, and you don't see that stuff. Now they're taking a chance on all these interesting solo directions, kind of based on those few books, kind of hitting a stride,
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to see the direction of all of comics now going because of some of these people's work.
I think what works in Hawkeye and what works in Sex Criminals and what works in all of the books that you mentioned, and what works most successfully in comics in general is making your characters vulnerable and making your characters flawed. One of the things that really struck a chord with me reading Sex Criminals right now is how candidly it talks about issues of mental illness and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a little coded, but in particular, sort of the character of John, issue number 6, which I don't want to talk about too much, really strongly kind of brings into focus the challenge, or really his whole arc brings into the challenge of what it's like to live with, to struggle with a mental illness where you have to choose between feeling like yourself, which might be a little out of control, or being black and white and emotionless by being on drugs. And I think, for me, right now, because the Robin Williams story is so topical in the news, and people are starting to talk about depression and addiction more candidly. When you have a story that connects at that level, that takes characters and it like hits right at the heart of something that's very personal and vulnerable, I think it's really hard for readers not to respond to that. And I think that by making, I think he did that with Hawkeye. Matt Fraction did. I think that any successful comic does that. It hits a spot of human vulnerability, and it gives the audience an opportunity to sort of emotionally connect with something that maybe they don't have an opportunity to do. For me, when Fraction has been by far the most successful as a writer is when he's done that. It's when he's gone to somebody's pain, when he's written to their pain and written to their anxiety and written to their sadness. And when he does those things, even in Fear itself, there are beats in that comic book that are heartbreaking when it deals with sort of the civilians in town, in the background, because he goes right for it. He goes right for where it hurts, for his characters, for himself, and for his readers. And I think that creators that do that, creators that remain true to that, they'll find an audience, and we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see more and more comics going that direction, and seeing huge success. Because, I mean, Sex Criminals is a big deal. It's on, it's a Time Magazine best comic. It's gotten more press than just about any comic released in 2013, and it's because he went right to the pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that is one of this comic's strength, and just his strength, as you said, as a writer. It's really impressive, and it's really brave too, especially with Sex Criminals #6. I remember reading an interview with him somewhere that I think it might have been his. He and Kelly Stu have a newsletter that they send out every other week or something like that. I don't know if you guys are subscribed, but it's really nice. It just sort of gives you an update on what they're working on and what's going on in their lives, etc., etc. And I think it was in that he said that Sex Criminals #6 was one of the most difficult things that he had to do because it was sort of the most personal thing that he's ever done, and it felt like putting himself sort of and his severe vulnerability out on display for the whole world to see, and that's got to be incredibly difficult, and I commend him for that because it's something that a lot of people struggle with, and having sort of seeing that reflected in a piece of art that you love is, I think, really profound, not only for the writer but for the audience as well, and it's something that I think we need more of in general, just in sort of pop art kind of stuff, and it makes the world a better place, and he does a damn good job of it, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I haven't read issue 7 yet, but I'm wondering if it continues.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I haven't been to the shop today. But it made me really happy. It made me sort of just want to, give him a pat on the back. It's a damn good job, man. It's a damn good job.
Yeah, it was I haven't read the latest 2 issues, but it does pack a serious punch, and it just has this level of relatability that and that it speaks to everyone, and it's not bullshit. It doesn't bullshit around any of the tropes that you normally find, or the cop outs and the plot devices, or the heavy-handedness, or the glorification, or even the desensitizing. It doesn't do any of that. It treats it for what it is. It's not tasteless. Well, it is pretty tasteless at parts, but when it
Tastefully tasteless.
when it needs to be. But it doesn't broach certain topics. I mean, it does. I mean, they just joke about having sex all the time, and then they do have sex all the time. It's really hilarious, but
it seems like almost sorry to interrupt, but it seems like the sex is almost secondary to the sex jokes are there and everything. But I think what you were talking about earlier, Eric, is that the opening is so great because it shows them having sex. And it's funny, and then this really serious thing happens. Her father is shot out of a window, and it's then the first handful of pages are her dealing with the fact that her father has died and her mother's becoming an alcoholic. She doesn't know how to deal with her, but it's peppered with these jokes, in that first scene where she goes, after I was the first kid in my class to join the Dead Dad Club, but then that Halloween was amazing, and it shows her knocking on the door. The person answers and asks, "What is she supposed to be?" And she says, "I'm the girl whose dad just died."
Well, it deals with that so honestly. That's what's so cool about it, is it's not played up too heavy. She goes about it that's her normal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's not disrespectful to her father. She misses him,
mm-hmm.
but she speaks about it so plainly because it's just something that happened. And the same thing with her mom. She it was something that happened, and she dealt with it by getting mad about it. But the way she explains it, isn't pandering. It's not heavy-handed. It's just my dad died. He was murdered. I wish it wasn't a senseless crime, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm the kid whose dad, and as the kid growing up, that was what she had to deal with. You know,
Yeah.
it was.
And that gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that like it's so impressive like how Fraction handles that, like dealing with these like deep, serious issues without going too deep into them, while like treating them with humor, but without making too light of the situation. And like that's incredibly friggin' difficult, and it's awe-inspiring to see how he does it, and like he does it throughout the entirety of the series too. Especially one of the things that stood out to me, and it was like another sort of topic about the book I wanted to broach, was that how he like portrays being a kid trying to learn about sex in an area where you can't really successfully do that, and like she tries to come to her mom, and her mom doesn't understand. She tries to go to her doctor. Her doctor says that, oh, you should, you fall asleep with your husband after you have an orgasm. And then she tries to go to those girls, and the girls don't really understand exactly what she's looking for either. And it speaks to sort of like the problem of like a lack of sex education. It even says at one point, like, no wonder so many stupid kids get pregnant. But at the same time, like it stops right there. Like it shows that, like, makes a little bit of a joke out of it, but still lays down the facts that this is a problem, but then comes back, so it doesn't become preachy. And it's still funny, and you still see the seriousness of it at the same time. Yeah. You all right?
Yeah. No, yeah, it was I really enjoyed the book. It was one of the better picks of our two picks.
Is there anything that you guys didn't like about this book?
I mean, I hate finding stuff to nitpick sometimes about these things. If I don't like it, it's usually like a personal style choice. But I think because I read the trade, I really kind of like it for what it is. And if I don't, then I can usually find something that I don't like. But with this, maybe I guess sort of the play up with the timeline and how it would you would even say we're jump cutting now, the magic of editing, how it would kind of jump chronologically at first threw me off. I actually reread the first issue just because it kind of threw me off the flow of it. She's in school, and then she's older, throwing this party, and then she's in high school, and she's back in school. It was, I wanted to.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, I needed to kind of get my bearings with it. But once I got used to that whole aspect, like the second issue, which did very similar things with its jumps through time, I was kind of acclimated to it, and I understood how the story was going and what exactly what the device was, and it really was like a coming of age story where you're meeting them in the now, and you're getting to know them, and whenever you get to know a person, you never learn their life story from start to finish. You always just pick up bits and pieces of it, like the pieces that make them who they are, and you get them in different kernels of time, So, like I said, it wasn't really a nitpick, but at first it threw me off. It wasn't something I was ready for, but like I said, these people they're very talented at what they do, and there's not really anything. I feel like there was nothing really wasted in this comic, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, they made a excellent use of the real estate for the issue, which is great. I think that was really the only, and it's not even really a critique, because it's still successful. Like the jumping back and forth between times was a little unclear, but it's I understood what was going on. Like you just sort of figure out there's that split second, like, wait, what? And then you just look back for 1 second, like, oh, okay, I got it. Other than that, there's really I hate to say it, but this book is like next to perfect. These first 5 issues are just so incredibly well done, and we all know that. Like anyone who's ever read this understands why this is such a fucking great book.
I think that there is a bit of a danger, depending upon how the plot and the villains develop. I mean, you can knock your first chapter out of the park, and then if you don't sort of have the right follow up, it can start to seem off. So I mean, as it stands, I think it's 100% perfect. But me reading it as a reader, I worry a little bit. I'm like, hopefully the sex police, they're a little abrupt in the first 5 issues, which I think is the point, because I think that's going to be focusing on them more. But if they don't, it's going to seem abrupt and unfortunate. So I guess there's always the danger that as you get into the second and third chapters, or the fourth and fifth, I don't even know if they've commented on how long they expect this thing to run.
Yeah.
That it you look back at it and you're like, why didn't we get more of this here? But now, as it stands, it's damn near flawless. I mean, you read it, you want to read the next issue.
Yeah, you just want to go through it.
It's very easy to read, and I mean, it wasn't like it's something where you don't have to look at it and you thumb through really, really quick. But it was other than those time jumps, which, like you said, you just go back and go through it again. But once it's a very quick read, and I appreciate that aspect of it. It's not that it's decompressed at all. Well, I mean, it kind of is, but it feels like a very organic flow, and there isn't too much time wasted on any one aspect. It spends 2 pages on one scene really and moves on, and it goes through it really quick. I thought. Well, in even in kind of retrospect, was where John was talking about his illness, and he was kind of like, it's not that big a deal, and she's like, whoa, she seemed really thrown off by it and really worried at first, and it kind of, I don't know, that kind of jarred me, but I guess, I mean, it makes sense in a, I guess I've just never been in that situation where I've dated someone who's pulled me aside and said they have a serious problem. I mean, it's not that I would run away, but I guess I've never really dealt with that. But that reaction just seemed kind of like a little too worrisome, especially for a guy that you just caught taking a shit in his boss's plant. It's not like that's. I mean, they're having sex all over the place, and they have this really good relationship, and they joke about everything. And he takes a shit in his boss's plant, and he's really worried about she's going to see it. Like, why was that?
It kind of makes sense. Though. I thought like that reaction, with someone that you just sort of first met, and like everything seems to have come together in your head so quickly, and they felt like essentially what seems to be love, and like they're having sex all the time, and you think talking about robbing banks together and all this sort of stuff, and then like she finds out that like he has this issue that leads him to do something as weird as that, and then like they have that discussion. It would make sense to sort of take that step back for a minute. Like, it seems like for sort of that first hiccup there, almost, and like anyone who's been in a relationship knows that there's at first there's that sort of honeymoon period, and then there's that first thing that happens. You're like, oh, wait a minute. There's that first little hiccup that sort of. I don't know if that exactly serves in this particular thing, but I don't know. It made sense to me. I thought it was point on. So
it worked for me, but I see where you're coming from, Joe. I guess even when I was reading it, there was a bit of like, I'm surprised that they're both so upset about this, considering everything else. But it also, as much as it's surprising, it's also completely reasonable and natural. So
yeah, her reaction to the illness was genuine. I guess was genuine. Like I said, I never really dealt with that, but the reaction to shitting in a plant was entirely overblown. I mean, they can stop time. Of course, the guy's shitting in his boss's
but don't shit.
Of course, like this hasn't come through anyone else's head, Like, come on.
If you could stop time, you'd crap in your boss's plant. Is that what you're saying?
Well, maybe not that. Something.
Yeah, it
especially
would be.
not
I think
publicly.
maybe
Maybe not
maybe
my
it is a little
not
bit.
my boss, but I mean, we've all had a boss that you
Yeah, no,
want to
there are
shit.
plants out there that I think that could stand to be shit in.
There are plenty of plants out there.
I'd take a shit in a plant with one or two people.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention any names, but some people just deserve shit in their plants.
Yeah.
And it's just a little.
Now that we're talking about it, actually, it does kind of seem a little bit like a device, but it wasn't too bad to broach that topic of his issues, because there needs to be some sort of entrance into it, and I guess that was one. And it is a weird thing. I mean, you just all of a sudden see some dude that you've just been having sex with, shitting in a plant for no reason, and he acts all surprised and like ashamed of it.
Oh my god.
You have to ask yourself the question, like, if he just played it off cool, just like, no, this is normal. This is what you do. Like, this is who I am. Come on, relax. That is the secret to a healthy relationship, when you can shit in a plant and just your significant other just be like, what?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe she has a thing with like pooping. Some people are. They just don't like pooping in front of
butt
each
stuff,
other.
man.
But she's into butt stuff. What the hell? She's into that thing.
Do you guys have any sort of final wrapping thoughts?
I enjoyed it. Eric, good pick.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Honestly,
I'm glad it. Glad everybody else liked it. I think we had some good stuff to say about it. It's a good comic. People should read it. It's like Image has done a really remarkable job of making the initial trades for these books really accessible, financially and otherwise. I've gotten into so many series for Image just because the Volume 1 trade is $10.
Yeah.
So I
we
got a stack. I got a stack of Image trades actually when I got this. I got the new Chew. I got the first volume of Rat Queens because I gave my other first volume of Rat Queens away, and I got maybe one or two others. But they make them so cheap and so easy to get. Like $10 for this is the best deal you're going to find in comics.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best decisions that Image has made with their stuff. Because I work at a shop, and we actually have like a whole little display of all like the $10 Image trades, and we sell through so many of them. We have no idea. It's so easy to put a book into someone's hands. I'm like, oh, this is really good. You should check it out. And they see it, and they're like, oh, it's only $10. Hell yeah, absolutely. And then they'll buy like 2 or 3 of stuff that they wouldn't have bought otherwise. If it was $20, no, you couldn't make that sale. But it's smart. It gets people into comics. We get a lot of the people who have picked up those books to come back into the store and ask about the next issues and the next trade, and do a subscription. It's great. It's a boon to the whole industry and to just the medium itself.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up. Everyone enjoyed it. If you're not reading Sex Criminals, all 18 of you out there, you can go pick it up at your local comic book store or online, but whatever you want to do. Next week we'll be talking with Ryan Burton about Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley, the new graphic novel whose follow-up to the Scott Pilgrim series. Same time next week, we'll be on 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. Thank you, David, Eric, myself, Joseph, from The Bleed. Have a good night.
Thanks.